Hey guys, welcome back to the show. So I am here in Sedona with Brad Olsen. He's here for the Rise of the Guardians conference. We're getting ready to head there actually after we do this interview. But Brad he just released a book called Secrets of Antarctica, which is why we're doing this interview today. It's absolutely fascinating material. If you guys have been following me on my personal YouTube channel, I've been covering this book, Genesis for the Space Race, which really dovetails perfectly with the information in his book. So it covers the whole the story of how the Germans made their way to the Antarctica, to the South Pole, and set up shop potentially in the Hollow Earth. And there's a lot of evidence to support that. It's not just some wild theory anymore. So I'm here with Brad. So excited to have you here. This is amazing. This is actually my absolute favorite, most fascinating subject right now. And I can't get enough of it. So I'm glad to have this conversation.
Yeah, and Tyler, you've been breaking grounds with these books and your research. And as you said in the pre-interview, this stuff all dovetails together. So when you get all these data points that continue to corroborate this whole Germans and the inner Earth story, it becomes much more believable because there's so much more evidence to support it together.
Right, right. No, I agree. So I guess for the audience who doesn't know, we had you on about man, almost I don't know 6, 8 months ago,
Yeah,
talking about this stuff, but your book wasn't out yet.
right.
So now your book's out, and we can really get into some of the stuff. And we were just kind of comparing notes. So let's just start with, okay, you've been researching this stuff. You met this guy named Frank, right?
Yeah,
Interestingly enough, the author who wrote this book, he met a guy named Frank who was his researcher who helped him find the information, but a different Frank.
okay.
They both passed away, but it's just an interesting synchronicity. So you met Frank and he shows you all this evidence, including even potential maps on how the Germans
Right.
were getting to Hollow Earth. So can you tell that story a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was on a radio show called Alpha Broadcast with Agi Nast. He's from Denmark. And after the show, this is about a year ago, year and a half ago, he said, "Hey, Brad, I know this guy in Germany. He speaks fluent German. He reads German. He can even read and write in Russian. Would you be interested in seeing him or talking to him?" I said, "Of course I am. I'm working on this book, so be happy to do it." And we struck up a friendship. We spoke almost every day. I was sharing some of my Antarctica information, and he started giving me these maps.
I'll put them on the screen.
Okay,
Actually,
sure.
I'm gonna do this one right because I'm this is
This is pretty
yeah,
important stuff,
yeah,
which shows the directions of the U-boats as well as the written directions in German, and specifically says Agartha.
right,
And even on these submarine maps, where they terminate is the lighthouse of Agartha. So they have very specific directions, the diving instructions, how deep you go. And we know how Germans are. They're very exact. So they say 53.2 meters. That's exactly what they mean.
right.
And so now we have the Germans going there even before Operation High Jump, which was to dislodge them because they knew that the Germans were bringing down a lot of materiel, personnel, and setting up this base 211.
Right.
And the reason they know that is because the British had cracked the Enigma code in the early 1940s. They were already listening to the conversation of the U-boats heading down there. So they knew that there was game down there. And they also knew that the Germans had at least two flying discs, and that was in Byrd's specific orders to try to recover or capture two flying discs.
Right. So let's talk about this as far as, we were just comparing notes, talking about New Berlin and New Germany.
Mhm.
So this is where, when they eventually set up shop down there, they didn't just get to do it freely. They had to get permission from the inner earth beings. And there was a treaty that was signed that's covered in this book, but you also found corroborating evidence of that as well. And to me, that's fascinating because, like, again, you could write it off from one source, but then you're finding it from two different people. It really helps paint this picture.
Yeah, and that's really what's so fascinating is because then you have all these different data points that come in that say that the Germans had an idea of where they wanted to go. And so Schumacher was the pilot of a seaplane that came off of the New Schwabenland boat, as actually called the SS Schwabenland, and the area was called New Schwabenland, named after the boat. They landed at this place called the Schumacher Ponds, named after the pilot, but the crew went off with an area that they went to find a way into under the ice to this inner earth realm. And, inner earth is kind of this, it's a term that could mean a lot of things.
Right.
It could just mean under the ice, right?
Right.
It could also mean well deep into the core and mantle of the earth, but it could also be deep underground military bases.
Right.
Technically, they're all inner earth.
Right. Well, that map you showed me, it was like a schematic of potentially the whole hollow earth with the central sun.
Right.
So that's what's corroborated in here. And the one thing that we don't hear about is a follow-up high jump mission. So after high jump,
Well, there's deep freeze.
yeah, well, but potentially what happened is that they went back with, so the US had their own flying saucer program that was secret, according to this. After high jump, they went back peacefully and they were granted permission and they actually investigated that artificial sun, and they were getting too close to it and they were ordered to leave because, well, whatever the story, however the story goes. But it seems that, so where did that map come from that you found of that central sun?
Yeah, so that was in the Anna Society. So they had their headquarters also in Berlin. Keep in mind, at the end of World War II, the Soviets were the first to get to Berlin. So they were the first to get all the maps and all the documents, not only from the three fighting forces of the Kriegsmarine Navy, the Luftwaffe Air Force, but also the um, Wehrmacht, the army. But they also got the Anna Society material too. They put it all together in what was a large file called the ROM file, and one part of that was the Orion file. This went all the way up to Joseph Stalin himself, who then ordered the Soviet military to go follow these directions from the German U-boat maps and try to also penetrate this inner Earth, where in the ROM files, it says that it was called off because the submarines started going into this choke point under the ice in Antarctica, and submersibles came out and confronted them. So they had to call off the mission. At the exact same time, this is in late 1946, here's the surface ships of Operation High Jump doing their operation. This is all post World War II, and both the Soviets and the Americans are going down there with invasion forces
Right.
to try to penetrate these bases.
Right. And but what's interesting too is there's a whole history of between Russia and this Inner Earth Society, allegedly. So when Russia tried to go, the Soviets, they were immediately turned away because they had already tried once before aggressively. So they weren't going to be allowed back in, if I got that right. Anyway, there's like a whole history. But what's interesting is that also corroborates like what your research that
Yeah.
just says the exact same thing. The Russians tried and were turned away,
Yep.
and potentially some of them were even destroyed. I don't know the whole details of that story, but going back a little bit, talking about them having to get permission to build New Berlin and
Yeah.
this construction, like what kind of information did you find as far as that goes?
And let's keep in mind there was more than one base. So base 211 was more of a inner ice submarine fulcrum base. You can only access it under the ice, but there were probably ways to go up and down. That's what the Schumacher party found. But they knew exactly where to go. And so this even traces back to the 1930s when the Germans were sending expeditions to Tibet.
Hmm.
And so on the expedition that came back to Berlin in 1938 from Tibet, it was led by Ernst Schaefer.
Okay.
And he had some kind of information that the Germans immediately took action upon and set up their Schwabenland expedition in that same year in 1938, like a very urgent need to get down to Antarctica. This is all pre-World War II. And then they started several supply shipping lines all through the war years too, when they were intercepted by the British cracking the Enigma code, knowing that they're bringing all this stuff down there, including some of their flying discs.
Right. Yeah, so and then specifically on the constructions, you said
Yep.
they were building a type of construction that they wanted to do on the surface, but they weren't able to, or can you explain that?
Yeah. So Albert Speer was this major architect of the Third Reich, and they had schematics where they were going to create this large New Berlin city in Berlin.
Right,
But of course, the war uh, changed all that, and old Berlin got destroyed, and these plans never took off. But there was a researcher named Vladimir Terzinsky, and he was a pretty prolific speaker, and I think he had access to the ROM file and the Orion files because he was talking about, and this is a quote, "The city of New Berlin was developed into inner Earth and part of the German South Polar colony. They were admitted by the inner Earthlings to build a city there. They built most of the buildings that architect Albert Speer was planning to build in Berlin. And they later established shoulder-to-shoulder cooperation with the Russians and the Americans quietly of the Illuminati government."
right,
So after the Russians and the Americans were both repelled from high jump and the submarine entrance, they realized that the Germans have way more advanced technology.
right.
And rather than going into a full-blown war, why don't we strike a deal with them?
Mhm.
And we want to get their technology. They want us to leave them alone. And that's essentially the basis of the Antarctica Treaty, which was fully ratified in 1959.
Right, and what's fascinating is in this book, John B. Leith was, I believe, potentially even targeted and taken out
Yeah.
because of leaking information like this. What's fascinating about this book is that the material was compiled in 1980. It never saw the light of the day until 2013.
Mm.
So we're talking information from the 80s and earlier. But John B. Leith, he did an interview where he sounded like he was scared for his life. Actually, he was on stage. You saw the video, and he talked about knowing of the Hollow Earth. And there's allegedly these 300 photos that were taken and that were real. He didn't have access to them, but he knew of them. And he said, I could be killed for sharing this information. In the back of this book, there are some of those photos. And one of those photos, and I'll put this on the screen, is literally of the tour at New Berlin, photo in the inner earth.
Wow.
It's a very bad it's a not a good quality photo, but, um, you wouldn't know the difference that this wasn't on the surface because these are familiar constructions, but, it also talks about how some of the inner earth beings that were already there once they struck this treaty, this deal with the Germans, the New Germans, the New Berlin, they actually had assistance from the inner earth beings and they helped them construct this stuff. So it's a really and they, they allotted them some land that
Mm.
they had, and there's a whole all the details are here. But it's fascinating to me because this tells some of the story, and then you have some of the actual documents and evidence. So
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
Especially when you consider the Russians, the British, the Americans all knew the Germans were setting this up.
Right.
And it makes perfect sense that even the Americans would wanna keep this top secret,
Hmm.
not only because they had their ass handed to them in high jump, which
Right.
was called off 2 months into the 6-month expedition,
Right.
which Byrd said before he went down there, his mission was military in nature.
Yeah.
And they go down there with an attack force,
Yes.
and it broke off into 3 groups, and 2 of the groups, the East and West group, were keep going back and forth around New Schwabenland.
Hmm.
So they were trying to zero in on where they were. And I have a bombing map, which I didn't put in the book because it was just very low resolution, but it showed where the Allies thought that base 211 was.
Interesting.
And they were going there, and it's really all around the Schumacher Ponds and the uh, M- German Moloth Hoffman mountain range.
Okay.
And that's where, on the first trip down there, they thought that there was surface water port that the Germans could use to build their base there.
Right.
But I think all of those had a connection down to the lower area below the ice
Oh, I would
where
imagine so.
submarines could access.
Right. And of this alleged hole, that you talk about in the map that, there's actually the flight path shows Bird actually
Yeah.
going around it. This tells, that same story, and it talks about
Oh, really?
how in an earlier expedition, Bird actually went and the reason he couldn't investigate further was because of didn't have enough gas
Right.
or fuel.
Right.
So he had to come back, but he knew of it. So actually there was one more pre-high jump mission where they went back and verified the hole and partially flew into it. It's a lesser known story. And that's when they actually were encountered by 5 discs with swastikas
Wow. Coming
be,
up
be,
out of the hole?
before high jump. So they turned back and then they go back and report this to Truman. And Truman sent them to begin with because of Operation Tabarin, where the British went and did a reconnaissance and discovered that Germany had
Yep.
set up shop. So that intel got back to Truman. Truman sends Byrd to do a recon. They encountered by flying saucers. They come back, and then that's how high jump got set up.
But that was the 3 hours of missing time,
Yeah,
which was actually one of the first flights of high jump. So they did come down there, and Byrd was stationed out of Little America,
yeah,
which he set up. Still, it's like a museum now. It's just defunct buildings. The main operations moved to McMurdo.
right.
And 3 years ago, according to Linda Moulton Howe, her whistleblowers, and also Michael Sala, reported on a contingent of Germans making their way to McMurdo in the middle of winter, just saying, "Get us out of here. We want to leave." And they showed up overland. So they're coming in on a cat track. It's about the only way you can
Right,
do it. So I've been thinking, where would they come from?
right,
Well, where they came from was the hole in the ice where
right,
Brian S. said there's a road that corkscrews down.
right,
So they were probably in inner earth and just a contingent said, let's get out of here and go
right.
to McMurdo and see if they'll fly us out of here. And they did.
And I'm just thinking as you're saying this, the way Byrd described in one of his reports in this book was it was like a corkscrew spiral
Yeah.
going in.
Yep.
So again, even Byrd said that. So
Wow.
he confirmed it. Um,
That's what
so
Brian S. said too.
so it makes me wonder because what this explains that treaty was is there was no war allowed, no violence, and the citizens were monitored for a full 30-year period, and they were closely watched and monitored to make sure that they weren't inciting violence. Like it's a very peaceful place.
Yeah.
But and in the event that somebody did break the law or go against that, they were ejected back to the surface.
Yep.
And it makes me wonder if that's potentially what happened to that group that was coming through the South Pole Station. If they were wanted out of there, maybe they were no longer welcome for some reason.
That's a good point. And when these submarines arrived at Mar del Plata in Argentina several months after the conclusion of World War II. So in the summer of 1945, U-530 and U-977 surrendered at Mar del Plata, and a whole bunch of soldiers who had wounds from the war from a couple months earlier were aboard.
Mm.
So you're right. Maybe they got there and they said, "No, you're too warlike," or
Yeah,
"You still wanna fight, and we don't wanna have that here."
right, exactly. And so there's a lot of information about secret peaceful negotiations with the
Mm,
US and the Inner Earth Germans and like an absolute treaty to maintain secrecy. Like this is something that we can never know about because for war reasons, it would potentially it's like another war front that we have to potentially battle because we're war-minded on
yeah,
the surface, but they're not. But if we were to release this information, the public and the military would deem it as a threat,
right.
even though they were saying they were peaceful. So to protect them, obviously it's been all kept a secret. But some of the information in this book comes from allegedly one of the people from Inner Earth. They call them a Bodlander or something for some weird reason. They they have to get a Icelandic visa, a passport through Iceland if they want to. Anybody that wants to go to or from the surface has to go through Iceland.
Mm,
And he was working in a university as a professor in Washington D.C. And this was back in
John Leith was?
no, this guy from Inner Earth.
Oh,
He
okay.
came to live on the surface, and he was here in disguise as a professor. This John B. Leith interviewed him, and he told him all about what's happening down there, and there's the whole transcribed interview.
Oh, cool.
So it's just all to say that even some of the Inner Earth inhabitants are surface
Yeah.
dwellers as well. Yeah.
And Carrie Cassidy on Project Camelot, she got a book submitted to Camelot about 10 years ago, all written in German with a lot of really arcane mathematical and physics type computations. That part is in and of itself a different part of the book, but in the beginning, and it's called the New Berlin Base.
Mm,
And she had it translated in the first part of the book. The author describes growing up in a German speaking colony underneath the domes of ice. He eventually makes his way out, gets back to Germany, publishes this book, and as far as I know, he's pretty much dropped off the radar since then.
right.
People have been trying to interview him and stuff. But it was interesting how he talked about growing up
Yep.
as a multi-generational
Yeah.
German, although he was of Indian descent. But what's interesting is at the Schumacher Ponds today, there's an Indian base,
Yeah.
and those lakes are very deep. So we think that they could possibly one of the submarine ports.
That's so interesting. Man, you gotta read this because
I do.
it talks about that. It talks about how certain, like, not even children, but even adults will come to the surface to complete schooling in the universities on the surface, but they're given, like, basically a new identity and all this stuff, and
Yep.
obviously, they're just like an exchange student or something, but they're really from these German colonies inside the Earth,
Yep.
and it just perfectly corroborates that.
Most recently, Stuart Swerdlow, who's one of the
Yeah.
last surviving boys of the Montauk Project, he's been getting on interviews with Nino Rodriguez and Dr. Sala, and he says he has a friend who's an Antarctic German. They don't like the term Nazi anymore either.
Right. Yeah, I
And
bet we could guess not.
he gets that. But he said that the Inner Earth or Antarctic Germans who are multi-generational now, it's like the grandchildren of the original Germans that colonized this area, that they want to come out. They want to tell the world, hey, we're here. And his quote is Stuart Swerdlow's friend told him, we want to come out, but we, quote, don't know how the world will react to saying that the Fourth Reich has been in existence for the last 70 years.
Right, and obviously, potentially, that would be seen as a threat, a major threat, but
Major threat.
we have a whole, the Nazis are still, alive, and there's a Fourth Reich, and so it's very fascinating. There's a letter that we've talked about before,
Yeah.
from a U-boat captain that was sent back and said the Earth is hollow.
Carl Unger.
Carl Unger. Can you tell that story a little bit? And maybe we can pull that up in your book too.
Yeah, sure. It has been corroborated, as you said. Groups have looked at the letter, analyzed the handwriting. The family says, yes, this is definitely Carl Unger's handwriting. And he and they checked out the paper that it was written on, and they also analyzed the ink. Everything checks out that
Right,
this was an authentic letter. In fact, I originally saw this on your fact board at Journey to Truth,
right,
along with some of the chapters from Admiral Byrd.
right,
And so, yeah, I dug deeper into the letter and found copies of it, which I have reprinted here, because he was going into Inner Earth in 1947. So this is considerably later
right.
after the war, and they're still going in there. And so his letter reads, Dear old comrade, and this is dated 4/20, 1947. 4/20 is actually Hitler's birthday.
Yeah, yes, it is
But
actually.
this is after they think he's dead, although I think we know that he
Right,
survived the war.
right,
So Hans, he writes his old comrade. He says, "This news will be a surprise for you. The U-209 submarine made it. The Earth is hollow. Dr. HAUSHOFER and HESS were right. The whole crew is well, but they cannot come back. We are not prisoners. I'm sure this news will reach you. This is your last connection with Submarine 209. We will meet again, comrade. I am worried for everyone who has to spend life on the surface of the earth since the Fuhrer is gone. God bless our Germany always, with hearty greetings, your friend Hans. And so, yeah, I mean, this Carl Unger letter, Hans was who he was writing this to.
Right.
But Carl Unger was saying it's a one-way trip. We're not prisoners. But this also corresponds with some other information I got from Frank, my research assistant. He had this blue book from one of the officers that was the one of the men in charge.
Right.
And he quoted the Fuhrer in a very top secret speech, but it was written in handwriting, and that has also been analyzed and confirmed. It's called the Conspect. It's the Fuhrer order of 10/1/1940. So October 10th, 1940. This is before America even enters the war. And the Fuhrer is saying to his main commanders in charge of the Antarctic operations, the conscript reads, quote, "The joint and organized research of our scientists, sailors, and submariners of the Kriegsmarine, who achieved the impossible, and the successful work of the SS detachments in the field of studying the heritage of our ancestors." That's actually what Ananurbe means.
Okay.
The study of the heritage of our ancestors of the Great Reich have allowed us to discover new and immeasurable territories for the German Reich in Antarctica, which are located under the ice of the South Pole.
Right.
He says South Pole, not New Schwabenland, not Eastern Antarctica, Western Antarctica, specifically the South Pole. I think that's very interesting because they knew about the hole in the ice too.
Right. Yeah.
So he just goes on to say, and this is how it ties in with Carl Unger, that the measures for resettlement of the best candidates from the ranks of the military and SS members must be carried out in strict secrecy, because these new territories of the German Reich and New Schwabenland, the commission that works on the selection of candidates must take into account that the volunteers will say goodbye to the fatherland forever and will be sent to New Schwabenland for a permanent stay.
Yeah.
Those were the ancestors of these multi-generational Germans. And what I got out of David Childress's book, and he even talks about when he does his talks on this, is that
Got those right here.
women from Croatia, which were part of the Third Reich, volunteered to go to Antarctica. They wanted to go, but they also got thousands of young, beautiful Ukrainian women to go down there to be the wives of the officers and scientists that also volunteered to go down there.
Yeah, and that's a whole other aspect to the story is as far as, there was an effort to preserve the Aryan race, and they were looking for pure-blooded Aryans to just basically a breeding program,
Right.
you know?
Oh, yeah.
And it was, potentially the Ukrainian women or whoever that were chosen, were selected, had a pure blood that they were looking for.
Right.
So that's fascinating. I didn't even know about that letter from Hitler or that speech from Hitler in 40,
Yeah.
which is so interesting. Man, there's so many connections. This
So many connections.
this
Yeah.
book claims that I guess Hitler went to Argentina temporarily, but then it claims he ended up in New Germany, which was under the ice in the South Pole, where he eventually died in 1977. And it talks about him having a son that nobody knew about, and the son like took over and was like ruling New Germany. Whether or not that's true, it's not verified, but it's fascinating nonetheless. And I just share all this stuff, take it with a grain of salt because we're just doing our best putting these pieces together. And
Yeah.
I don't believe like I accidentally found this book. I'm always looking for new information, and there seems to be a lot of truth. And wasn't there maps, like actual maps of the inner Earth continents as well?
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a photo in the back of this book with the Frank Hudson researcher. This is him sitting in front of one of the original maps.
Okay.
These are the inner Earth continents with the Agartha and New Germany and New Berlin. So I don't know if this image would even corroborate with the images, the map that you found, but Nevertheless, it seems that it was very well intricately mapped out, and it wasn't necessarily it was a discovery for us, but there had already been civilizations there for generations.
Yeah, and that's what's so fascinating about these U-boat maps, and there's several different versions of them, and, Frank charted it out on Google Earth where the Germans were going under the ice with their U-boats, and it turns out to be within 100 miles of the South Pole.
Right.
So you have not only a U-boat passage to go there through the water under the ice, and sometimes even under the land masses, but there were either lava tubes or big cave
Right.
entrances they could navigate the U-boats there. But you have the road that corkscrews down at the South Pole and is big enough to fly a plane in.
Mhm.
So you can actually get to these locations 3 different ways,
Right.
and there's also the, NSA that is stationed in South Pole. So they're up there monitoring all things that have to do with, ETs. That's
Right.
why the NSA was founded, and there's a building at McMurdo, an unmarked building that everybody knows is the NSA. It's like the biggest secret that everybody knows, kinda like our Area 51 here in
Right.
Nevada,
Right.
and they have, personnel stationed up at the South Pole base, and you'd think, "Well, what are they doing there if they're just working on the neutrino and ice cube experiments?"
Right.
Which also have something to do with, what's down below in the South Pole.
And this is another these are unfortunately, they're terrible quality, but these are apparently 2 photos of the construction of the Inner Earth city of New Berlin. So, if I would love to find the original photos of these. I tried to find them online, I couldn't, but I'll put them on screen. So it's really just interesting because I was looking for photos of the maps, but the reason I asked about the maps is because it seems that, um, I thought I saw you in one of your
I
presentations.
do,
That's it.
the hemisphere map.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, and there are many versions of these hemisphere maps. This is just the latest version. There are some where the ocean is not quite as dark, and every year that they draw these maps, they put in more details.
Right.
But I compared this is the hole in the ice to the continental landmass, and this is very close to what Antarctica would look like without the ice.
Mhm.
And I'll show an image of that, that if, you superimpose that map with this outline, and there's that hole in the ice, it pretty much matches up.
Oh, interesting.
So if you look at just the continental land, if you take the ice away, then you have these different hemispheres, and where they put, New Schwabenland was a location where, it's very rocky. It's one of the few coastlines that goes all the way around, but nearby there are ways to get in, and even according to the maps, they do go under the continental landmass at certain
Interesting.
points too.
Yeah, wow, there's so much there.
So much there.
And those maps are were those maps on the you said where they were from again?
Yeah, they were part of the, cache of maps, and here's Nikolai Subotin. See, he's flipping through a stack of them.
Yeah.
So the providence of their, reality, and this is an earlier version of those hemispheres where the oceans aren't black yet. But then so this guy got these, maps at the end of the Cold War. So in the early 1990s, you could show up in Moscow with a suitcase full of hard currency and find the right people that either worked at the KGB or could have access. Say, "Hey, I wanna get, alien autopsy videos."
Right.
"Okay, here you go."
Right.
"Hey, I wanna get, UFO crash videos." "Yep, we got those too. Here you go." But also a huge amount of Antarctica research as far as how Terzinsky and this documentary that was made about, the Russians and the Americans going down there, uh, during the war and after the war it was all based on these files, including the Orion file and the ROM files
Right.
that came out of Germany, went to the secret services like the KGB to analyze, but then at the Cold War, they're just like, they're just sitting in a shelf somewhere. We'll sell them to the highest bidder.
Right.
So this Russian journalist named Nikolai Subotin, he got a whole bunch of these documents, and he's only just recently been releasing them
Right.
on YouTube.
Yeah. And there's a fascinating history too. This book tells a story in the 1500s how an early group of Germans, way back in the 1500s, 16th century, were they were down in the Amazon for some reason,
Oh yeah.
and they were basically chased into this cavern system by these locals who were, deemed them as a threat. And they were forced into this cavern system where they eventually kept finding passageways that went deeper and deeper and deeper. And it was like 75 years. It was like
Wow.
generations of people. They ended up, they found life and vegetation and like even other creatures and stuff that existed there. And they eventually were forced to go deeper by some like some weird type of animal that they found that would like had them cornered. So they were forced to go deeper, and eventually they came out into this opening when they thought they came into the other side of the planet. They thought they had tunneled through the whole planet,
Wow.
but they had tunneled to the inside surface where they encountered this group of very advanced beings with like saucers and stuff. And this is the 1500s. They called themselves the New Atlanteans. They were Atlantean survivors that had fled the inner Earth during that cataclysm,
Wow.
and they were granted permission to stay there, and eventually some of those Germans made their way back to the surface with information of this whole land, and it's rumored that that's why Hitler, like, they knew, they were adamant. It wasn't like it was a sure thing. They wouldn't have invested that many resources into something that could have been.
Right.
Yeah, they sent recon missions, but they had intel.
Yeah.
They had intel, they knew that their ancestors had found this place, and it was allegedly just a rumor, but it was later verified by Hitler that there was actually some credibility to the claims, and that's why they went back. So,
Yeah, and part of that, research was when they came back from Tibet with diagrams and schematics for this inner Earth,
yeah,
and so you could say that, Ernst Schaefer, who was portrayed in the movie 7 Years in Tibet, of course, they didn't get anything about inner Earth or
right,
what they were really doing down there. They're mountain climbing. No, they're there to find evidence of this inner Earth civilization. That was the whole point of this whole Aryan research group, to find the origins of their ancestors, the
right.
Anunnaki.
So perfect, yeah.
Yeah.
And Karl Haushofer went to Tibet as well,
Yep.
and he spent time with the Green Dragon and the Black Dragon societies, which were allegedly these monks that, meditated in these caves, and they were like channeling these extraterrestrials. And he came back with all this knowledge. I read that in the Planet Serpo book, so I don't know how accurate that information is, but nevertheless, he allegedly came back with knowledge of the inner Earth as well
Yep.
from Tibet.
And the Germans were supplying the Tibetans, including the Dalai Lama, with radios. They were in constant communication. At the very end of the war, when the Russians were coming into Berlin, they went to a safe house for Tibetans. They didn't know it at the time, but they found a dozen Tibetans who had ritually committed suicide. They didn't know what that was all about. They're all laying in a circle. They're all dead with a knife in their chest. And it was because the Russians had a soldier from Siberia. He says, I know those people. They're Tibetans. And they were all wearing Third Reich SS officer uniforms.
Wow.
So there was a huge connection with Tibet and what they knew and what they supplied to the Germans, including these inner Earth maps,
Wow.
which the Germans then used and created their own maps through the Anunnaki Society, which show this central sun
Yeah.
and this inner Earth where everything gravity is the opposite.
Right.
So the inner sun rotates the opposite of the way the Earth does. I'm
Yeah.
still trying to wrap my head around this.
No, it's fascinating, and they also claim that gravity is generated within the Earth's crust, not the core.
Right.
Um, Also, like, the Tibetans have the, maps of the Hollow Earth,
Yep.
potentially. It's like a depicted all over, even on the surface. If you go there now, like on some of the structures, it's very similar to that, right?
Yeah, and so this is the original Tibetan map, and then the Germans superimposed with their different titles of what all the symbols were, including the symbol of the Anunnaki Society,
Wow.
which I think they got from the Tibetans.
Yeah. Well, it seems that there's many depictions of that, even on the surface. If you were to go there now in some of these ancient structures or temples, you
Yeah,
see that diagram, and no one's connecting the dots that it's actually a map of the Hollow Earth,
yeah.
which I think is fascinating.
So when I went to India, when I was traveling around the world, I was really amazed and even shocked to see the swastika on signs for temples, but it was flipped around and it was straight up. So just think of the swastika in an opposite direction. I'm like, that's pretty weird. I found out that it represents reincarnation because it's like the wheel of karma going around, but it's a sacred symbol in the Far East, especially in India and Tibet. And then I found that it's based on the star system of the Giant Dipper. So if you take the Giant Dipper and you flip it in 4 directions,
Right.
it creates a swastika.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of our greatest star symbol in the sky
Right.
is how the ancient Indians, but then co-opted by the Nazis
Right. And
for
then
use on their flag.
right, and then unfortunately, it's only viewed as a negative symbol when it was really an ancient sacred
Yeah.
symbol. Yeah.
You can't even have a flag with the swastika or the black sun in Germany today. They're illegal.
Oh, I
You
didn't
you
know
would
that.
get arrested. Yeah.
I did not know that. Wow.
Even David Childress told me this. He had to order the kit for the Honeyboo Revel model
Yeah, yeah,
kit
yeah.
from Turkey.
The flying saucer
Yeah.
model toy.
Yeah, they make their own toys out of it,
Mhm.
and you cannot even buy that in Germany. It's
Right.
illegal, and
Right.
if you had it, they would take it away from you.
Yeah, and that's a whole other aspect to this story is the German flying saucer program and how they developed that technology. And there's a lot of information in this book and also the Sands of Time material. So that's another thing I'm fascinated in. But it really does dovetail because one of the reasons Hitler wanted to go to the South Pole was because they were actually aided. They had help developing these flying saucers from
Yeah,
extraterrestrials potentially, the Vril and the Venusians, according to some information I've found. But they said, "We'll help you, but as long as you don't turn them into war machines." Well, Hitler was not. He was looking to win the war.
to
So
dominate. Yeah,
he took a bunch of scientists, thousands of scientists and engineers and manpower to the South Pole
yep,
so they can develop finish the continuation of their flying saucer program and figure out how they can weaponize these things and, attach guns to them. But
right.
they were trying to do it to even hide from the ETs, and they had another base in Germany still where they were developing a peaceful one, right? The one that was just gonna be used for travel and exploration. So, another reason he wanted to go there was to continue this flying saucer program.
Yep, and they did actually find a way to mount a gun
Yeah,
on the Honeyboo craft.
right, they did eventually, absolutely.
Had they had that 6 months or a year earlier, could have very easily turned the tide of World War II.
Right, right. But apparently they went against the deal. They broke the deal. They said, "We'll help you, but you can't use these as war machines."
Right.
And he said, "Well, okay, great, we'll do it. Thanks." And then he sends sets up shop in Antarctica
Yeah,
and continues the program against their wishes and ends up turning them into putting guns on them. So,
yeah,
but they still can't publicly disclose them. So what's the purpose?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an incredible history, the saying that history is written by the winners.
Right.
That's why they don't tell you that the last battle in World War II were all the, U-boats that were fleeing Germany, and in my new talk that I'll be giving at, Rise of the Guardians tomorrow, and I'm flying to Germany in a week, and I'll be giving this in front of a German audience, so
Oh man,
see how well that's received,
I would love to be there for that.
that the Germans actually still held Hamburg as well as Norway at the very end of the war. So they had all the ability to just ship that right on out to Antarctica. And I think that's exactly what they did. So according to Henry Stevens in the book called Dark Sun, that's one you should definitely read. They were heading out right at the tail end of the war. They just used a doppelganger for Hitler. And then the last battle of World War II was very one-sided, just the U-boats blasting their way through the North Sea on their way down to New Schwabenland. And in the book, Frank came up with several of these passports, which show New Schwabenland, Base 211, and for the officers were the Fuhrer's convoy. That was the final group of U-boats that went down there. In fact, when those 2 U-boats showed up in Argentina months later, they finally got it out of them that they were part of this Fuhrer's convoy.
Wow.
Part of Valkyrie 2 was the name of their operation to get their top scientists, top officers, and most likely Hitler himself.
Right. There's a whole other side of this coin where were you gonna say something else?
Well, the camera just moved to me for some reason. You gotta lean over now.
Right. That's what I'm talking about with this thing. All right, time out just for a second here. Let's do this. So, it's this weird tracking thing. Or not tracking.
I was using my arms and maybe it picked up that motion.
No, it does that. Technology is great until it's not. Okay. Hopefully that works. Let me pull this back up. Okay.
Hit record.
It's still recording.
Okay.
So what was I saying? Oh, there's the other side to this coin where there's allegedly a North Pole entrance as well.
Right.
And potentially why we're so interested in Greenland, because at the northern tip of Greenland, it's the Arctic Sea where it's this apparent hole is, and there's people that have talked about it in the past. But what is factual is that the Germans and the Russians and the United States have all have stations,
Right.
weather stations, but they're bases in Greenland.
Northern Greenland too.
Greenland, yeah. And allegedly, who knows what they're doing, but they can't the North Pole entrance is not as accessible because it's guarded by whoever's guarding it. And they can't freely access it like they can the South Pole, which it's just another fascinating, history.
Right, exactly. And Brooks Agnew, who speaks at conferences and he talks about inner Earth as well, he says he knows the GPS coordinates. I've tried to get it out of him. He won't tell me, but it sounds like it's on land, either at the very northern tip of Greenland or some of those northern islands, which are controlled by Norway. And in fact, the father and son in the Smoky God, they were sailing towards those northern islands in Norway when they found the entrance in the North Pole and were able to sail through inner Earth, and then they eventually popped out at the South Pole entrance.
Right, and they spent 2 years there, allegedly, and then when he came back and told the story, he was thrown in an insane asylum.
Right.
And then he was scared to talk about it, and the book wasn't actually released until he died, and he had given the information to somebody he met that he confided in and was afraid to release it while he was alive because of how tortured he was in the mental institution. So he's like, when I pass, can you please release this book? That's why it's authored by somebody else and not the
son
himself. The son himself. Yeah. So it's just incredible information. And there's too many data points. And then where's that other book that I was showing you? It's right there.
Yeah.
So this is another one called The Under People. This one's out of print.
Wow, that was a good find.
Yeah, it's one of my friends, my friend Nikki found this, and it's only available, there's only used copies, written in 1969, and it's a compilation of inner Earth testimonies.
Wow.
Dating back to the 1500s, some old stories about how we were much more, actually we used to be in communication and do business with the inner Earth people. And it was the Catholic Church that put an end to that. And there's even documents that prove the Catholic Church ordered all the entrances to be sealed. And they did that. So they cut off communication. And then next thing you know, we have, in I forget what year, 18 something, the theory of evolution comes out and that the whole we're just given this whole new history, and anything prior to that, there was no advanced civilization. So it kind of erases that history that we had with doing business with the inner Earth inhabitants.
Right.
So it's just fascinating, and there's actual documents and proof, and we showed it in our Hollow Earth webinar that I found written. They're Austrian from Austria. That literally say that the Catholic Church ordered the sealing of any entrance to the Hollow
Mm.
Earth. Yeah,
And there's other cooperation with that as far as how it is associated with the giants.
yeah,
And
that.
one area on Earth where giants are said to be on the surface, but it seems like they also have a connection to inner Earth, is in Sardinia. And one time at a conference, there was an Italian guy from Sardinia. He was just released a book in Italian and he spoke in Italian. We had to have an interpreter. But he said as a kid, they were finding these megalithic tombs for giants, as well as, there it goes again, as
Just
well
keep
as,
going.
yeah.
Hey,
That kind of worked. There we
we'll
go.
keep moving over here. Just keep talking. Yeah, it's
Well,
fine.
that he said that, every time they would find a new megalithic structure or giant bones, they would report it to the local constable. Then the police would then tell the Vatican. The Vatican would come in and just take the bones, cover up the megaliths, and just say, "You didn't see what you just saw."
I mean, yeah, that's exactly it. And we know the Smithsonian.
Yep,
They also talked about their Bureau of Ethnology. So there was a report when the Smithsonian first came out. There's actually evidence, and Aaron found this, that in their very first report that basically laid out what the purpose of the Smithsonian was to anything anterior to the discovery of Christopher Columbus and of the discovery of America in 1492 of Christopher Columbus, anything anterior to that discovery was to be considered illegitimate.
mm,
So anything that proved that there was advanced life or civilization before Columbus was thrown out,
yep,
and that's just simply the case. That's what happened, and
yep,
they're still maintaining that cover up. In fact, this book says the plane that bird flew to in high jump with
yep,
was eventually, once we got disclosure, it says it was eventually supposed to be on display in the Smithsonian with the whole history of what really happened, and I guarantee we'll never see that.
no,
But that was that their mindset was much different back then.
right. Also in the Smoky God, he says that he encountered a civilization of giants.
Yeah,
And they were very advanced. They had very nicely tailored clothes. They wore jewelry. They were twice the size of him and his father. And then when he made his way back to the surface and they were sailing back to Norway, he encountered the Patagonian giants.
yeah,
And he made the connection that the Patagonian giants, who were encountered by the very first mariners, including Magellan himself on the first voyage around the world, their historian said that the shoulders of the Spaniards and Italians on Magellan's ship only came up to the waist of the giant. And in fact, in many of the maps of the early mariners, they show these Patagonian giants and they're
right,
massive. They're twice the size of the
right.
Europeans at the time. And so he was making the connection in Smoky God that some of these giants from inner Earth just made their way out through the entrance.
Right.
And what's the closest continental landmass? It's southern tip of South America.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because when they and actually, in fact, before they even knew where they were encountered by those giants,
Yep.
yeah. So, actually, the 3rd book down right there, grab the 3rd book down. It's the best compilation
There we go.
of
Yep.
evidence of giants in well, this is
Dewhurst. Yep.
just America, but it's evidence, and it's any of the old newspaper articles that you can't find online, they're in this book, and it goes through all the states and all the mound sites and all that stuff, including Cahokia Mounds.
And all the original written as it was in the newspaper articles in the 19th century.
Yeah, and you can't hardly find those on the
Nope.
internet now, but that somebody did an amazing job putting this book together. What's his name? Richard?
Richard Dewhurst.
Yeah,
Yeah. It is an amazing book. I have this one.
yeah. So, I mean, that's just in America. That's
Yeah.
not even around the world, which we know it was everywhere.
Giants were found around the
Yeah,
world, yeah.
everywhere. So, man, this is we could go on, but I guess we'll start wrapping this up. Brad's book is The Secrets of Antarctica. I actually have a little, blurb I wrote about it. It's in the back
Yeah,
of
you
the book.
did.
It's in the back of the book. Thank you for that opportunity, and, I know there's a lot in here we didn't get into. We're being sprayed like cockroaches, chemtrails. I just opened up to that page. Um, but it's true. Yeah, no, so I love how you've compiled all this. I know it took a lot of time and work, especially all these images and maps and connecting all these dots. So if anyone's interested, grab his book, Secrets of Antarctica. And if you're in the Sedona area, well, actually, this won't be released until
After I talk.
after after the talk. So never mind. But anyway, yeah, this has been great. Thanks for coming over and doing this.
Oh, yeah.
Appreciate it.
Oh,
And
it's great talking to
I'm
you,
sure we'll
Tyler.
be working together in the future because I would love to put a film together or
Oh,
something
we got
that
to.
tells the story properly.
Yeah. There's
And
so much to this.
yeah, we'll stay connected as far as that goes. But any final words before we wrap up?
Oh, just I'm so glad that you're into this similar line of research. You've done some great videos based on this, and I contacted you offline. I'm like, where did you get
Yeah,
this new information?
yeah,
And it comes from this, so I definitely got to read this book.
yeah.
And it's so great that we're working together towards a common goal, and that's just figuring out our lost history,
Right,
as well as what really happened at the end of World War II with Operation High Jump and
mhm,
everything else in Antarctica.
right,
It's something that has just been kept away from the human race, but
right,
I often say that real meaningful disclosure could very easily come out of Antarctica. And on the back, I say all roads lead to Antarctica. Of course, no roads lead to Antarctica,
right.
but everything related to disclosure seems to have an element out of Antarctica.
Right, and including things that we haven't even scratched the surface on today.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's so much
so much more.
potentially, ancient pyramids down there and, ET bases and a number of other things that we've heard theories of, and we know, like, certain politicians have been flown down
Yep,
there, and Buzz Aldrin have been shown things and come back terrified, so
yep.
what's really happening down there? Who knows? It's probably all the above, and it's probably why it's, the world's best kept secret, so anyway, thank you so much for joining me. And guys, thank you for tuning into this. We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, have a great day or evening wherever you're at.